Chikara. In Japanese, it means as a masculine Japanese given name. When written in most forms of kanjin, the name means strength, power, authority, and other similar variations. Now, it also can revert to the word as power. In some contexts, also indicates authority of influence. The reason why I say this, Chikara was an American professional wrestling promotion based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The company took both its name and logo from the Japanese kanji means strength. It was founded in 2002 by professional wrestlers Mike Quackenbush and Reckless Youth, who also served as trainers and in-ring performers. Now, Chikara shut down in 2020 due to allegations of misconduct within the company during the Speaking Out movement. The Philadelphia Inquirer reported numerous women shared allegations of inappropriate behavior, including physical abuse and emotional abuse against wrestlers, trainers, and the owner, Mike Quackenbush. These allegations led to resignations of several wrestlers and eventually closure of the promotion, according to Voices of Wrestling. We bring this up in this edition of Polarizing, the wrestling podcast. We ask the questions of the what ifs. We delve into various topics of promotions, wrestlers, and whatnot. Once again, this is not a podcast. Speaking of wrestling shows, AEW, WWE, TNA, no, these are just a what if, a different aspect of the wrestling business. Joining me as always, my good friend, Michael Melkor. Hi, Mike. How's it going?
It's going okay, but so a moment ago, you mentioned Chikara ended in 2020. I'm gonna be very specific. It ended on June 24th, 2020. I'll tell you how I know that. It was my 46th birthday, and I spent it watching one of my favorite wrestling promotions that I was working for at the time disintegrate on social media in real time.
Now, tell us.
So
Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
I'm a little uniquely qualified to speak on this subject.
Yes, so this is episode three of Polarizing. So, where we ask the topic, we ask the question, what happened if Chikara never closed? Before we delve into this, I'm going to mainly hand the floor over to Mike because he worked for Chikara, any inner workings and whatnot. So, with the speaking out movement, the Me Too movement, we're going to get into that very shortly. But, Mike, I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us and the audience a little bit about Chikara, what it was all about, how it impacted today's professional wrestling.
So, looking at today's professional wrestling, I'm trying to think of a few. First of all, well, I'm going to answer that first. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of a few notable names in today's professional wrestling. Today, if somebody happens to hear this in a time capsule 100 years from now, we're talking June of 2025. A few of the notable performers that made their name in Chikara that people see on a weekly basis on TV now include Claudio Castagnoli, Eddie Kingston, CM Punk. There's quite a few that Chikara was a small independent promotion. It was a it was a combination of lucha libre and like comic book storytelling, really is the best way to put it. There were people, traditionalists, people that I guess wish kayfabe were still alive, if we want to use that terminology, that weren't crazy about Chikara. They weren't crazy. It didn't take wrestling seriously or any of that shit, sorry, I need to watch myself at that. It didn't take wrestling seriously or any of that, according to them. Um, but a lot of the Chikara wasn't just about like, oh, a lot of notable guys work there. I mean, Ring of Honor can make that claim, but Ring of Honor, what people love about it, it also had a unique product. There was the whole Code of Honor thing, which informed a lot of its booking. Chikara definitely had a unique product in how seriously it took its storytelling. Like one of my favorite reveals. Um, I loved it so much. I recently ran into Claudio Castagnoli, aforementioned, at Squared Circle Expo, and he was actually willing to do the pose with me, and I was so friggin' thrilled. One of my favorite reveals is the Bruderschafter Crucis, BDK. So Chikara actually did season premieres and season finales. They just started like January, February or so would be season premiere. Finale would be maybe sometime December. So this was one of the season finales that I'm not going to sit here and tell the whole story because the point of it is I can't recall all of the moving parts and pieces because it was a reveal that if people had been paying attention had been built up for 2 years. In an independent promotion back then, we're talking early mid tens. That's bloody unheard of. But they did it. And then they took it a step further with the Condor Security and the Teeter conglomerate storyline, which you want to talk about unheard of. And I think it was June of 2013. Anniversario Never Compromise ended with Condor Security shutting down not just the show, but Chikara. They literally went dark. They did not put on a show for almost a year and a half just to sell a story. People can get everybody fawns all over Triple H and his ability to tell stories and that, which is what I mean, which he's good at. I'm not going to sit here and dog it. I mean, he's a lot better than the regime that was there. But the complexity and level of storytelling that Chikara got into it makes current WWE look like 2000 era WCW. Like the detail and thought that went into all of these moving pieces was remarkable. And that is what drew me to it. That is what I thought was so amazing. So it really blew my mind. I used to own a website. I used to co-own a website with Ryan Bowman, thegorillaposition.com. And one of our writers who did a few pieces for us was a gentleman named Chris Levin. People may also recognize that name. He was known as Kid Ref with Impact and GCW and many other places for a while. He was the self-proclaimed best at being the worst. I still keep up with him. Um, but he had written for us. And he was working also for Chikara at that time. And he had gotten to know Mike pretty well and was, pretty involved behind the scenes there. So it blew my mind when a couple of years after he had been writing for us at the Gorilla Position. I had started with OVW. We'd sold the Gorilla Position. But before that, Chris had asked me if I wanted to work with Chikara. And it was, mind you, I mean, at this point, I'm in the Midwest. Chikara is a Philadelphia based. Obviously, I'm not traveling or driving or flying or none of that crap. It was remote. I say that to bring up the point that I was not around any of what happened, what allegedly happened. I didn't see it. I didn't hear it. I wasn't there. What I've heard is secondhand. And Most of the talking I did with people was through Slack. That's the name of it. I was trying to think of the name of the app, like a Microsoft Teams thing. That's how we worked. But I did some social media consulting. I did some work putting some stuff together in that regard. Some of the graphics were, some of the plotting and planning and best practices stuff and that kind of thing. Um, Hell, I still have, I don't know if you can probably see your reflection in it. This hard drive that I'm holding up. So I know those of you listening to this, that means nothing. I have an 18 terabyte hard drive in my hand. One of the things I have on that is a Chikara folder where I have the masters of the last several episodes, including the final episode, which featured a cybernetico match between the members of the Crucible and the members of the Wrestle Factory. That is the story they were doing when those allegations you had mentioned broke.
Now, to interrupt you a little bit, before we get into that, we're going to talk about what you touched on a little bit earlier, what makes Chikara so different for its time. The long storylines, the wrestlers, more importantly, the characters that came out of Chikara, like the ant colony, fire ant,
Yep,
soldier ant, and stuff like this. Now, if once again, my listeners, if you aren't too familiar with Chikara, pause this podcast and look it up. Chikara, Chikara Pro Wrestling. YouTube it, Google it. You'll find very entertaining matches way ahead of its time. Once again, you have the ant colony, and obviously a little tip, a little hint for some of you guys. One of the ant colony is now Orange Cassidy. If you
that's
look
right.
up some of his moves, beach break, stuff like that, his moves, he was one of the ants. So
Good catch.
as well.
That's right.
Yep. And it went from great wrestlers like Mike Quackenbush to the absurd like Dragon Dragon. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Dragon Dragon, he was a wrestler dressed up in a dragon suit. It went from that to Moss Man to just absurd characters who put on entertaining wrestling matches for fans. And like Mike said, had a great storyline to follow. So didn't mean to interrupt your train
Oh,
of thought, but please go ahead.
let's not forget we make this joke about people all the time, especially when they hand out names in NXT. But Chikara literally had a dude named Creator Wrestler. And that's what it was. It was as if somebody had created a silly wrestler on their thing. They had gone through several gimmicks. I can't remember the name, but it was like a Russian cow, like Boris the bovine, something or other was one of the creative gimmicks. The most notable creator wrestler gimmick, however, became Dasher Hatfield, part of the throwbacks with Sugar Dunkerton, who we now know as Shug D, who many folks may know as, I can't remember his name on AEW when he was doing the thing with Chris Jericho and the pineapple stuff. I can't remember what his name was on there because I know him as Shug D. But he went from Dasher Hatfield to ultimately a very good professional wrestler, a very good professional wrestler. Then Avery Good, and now I believe he's some kind of commissioner with IWTV. But
And
also, good dude.
and unless we forget, Jakar also had interesting tournaments as well. Didn't they have, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. Didn't they have a tournament, a three-person tournament, a round robin tournament, where they had wrestlers from all over the world going to Chikara for particular tournaments, or was that another company? I might be incorrect. Um,
The
Scorpio,
only thing,
Dreamer, Lynn, 1, 2, 3 Kids, stuff like that was part of it. Or am I misquoting here?
the only thing you got incorrect, it was not round robin, it was single elimination. But you're referring to King of Trios. That
Yes.
was one of their biggest events each year was a 2 or 3 day 3-man, 3-person tournament, whittling down to one winner.
And if you were a big wrestling fan back then, you went out of your way to find this footage because one of the matches they dedicated to Larry Sweeney,
Yes,
which
and
was an amazing
speaking,
trios match. Quackenbush, Miyama Toyota, and someone else. Please forgive me. I know you guys are screaming at me right now at your phone. Yeah, but you had so many stars from the past going for those trios tournaments. That was one of the other things that captured my heart when it came to Chikara. Because once again, on one hand, the wrestling was great. On the other hand, it was so absurd, it was entertaining.
that one I actually know the year. It was 2012. I know that because we talk about tournaments, we talk about, okay, so I'm not going to spend the rest of the time reminiscing, but there are a couple more things I have to get out. Larry Sweeney was another thing that Chikara gave us, who I miss dearly. I remember, and you were there for this, by the way, my man. I remember telling Larry Sweeney he was the next coming of Bobby Heenan. And he was absolutely taken aback and flattered that I would say that. But I'm like, dude, it's true. You are really that good. And in 2011, he took his own life. After the King of Trios tournament the following year, there was a round robin tournament in Chikara named for Larry Sweeney. It was the 12 large tournament, and it was a tournament to crown the first Chikara singles champion after they had been in existence at that point for a decade, mind you. But here we are. Um, but yeah, I mean, there was so much there. Now, the last story they were doing to kind of get to the meat of this was one called The Crucible. Basically, the story went, Chikara was part and parcel with the Wrestle Factory, the training school that Mike Quackenbush ran with, I mean, Icarus was a trainer there, several other people, Ophidian and others. So the story went that, the Wrestle Factory was training kids to wrestle and everything and be sportsmanlike and upstanding. But there was a group breaking away from that that's like, these kids are too soft. We need to train them to, at this point, again, you would have had the Tidor thing in Condor. You had a whole other group after that trying to take Chikara down. So there was a group that was like, okay, these kids can learn to wrestle. That's wonderful. But we also need to teach them to fight and defend this place so that we don't lose it again. And that's where the Crucible came from. They were very harsh. They were apparently holding secret matches after hours that were about 2 minutes long, very MMA style. Think the kind of stuff everybody raves about when they see blood sport now. Yeah, Chikara did that junk first too. Um, Nothing against Bloodsport. I love those shows. But just being honest, Chikara did that junk first too. Um, and then they were busted, the group led by Ophidian. So that was a betrayal of Quackenbush. So while we own the gorilla position, so one of the ways I got to know Chris, who got me into Chikara, we worked out a bit where I interviewed 3 of Chikara's stars. And my proposal, this wasn't anything they're like, now you got to keep it kayfabe, brother. None of that happened. This was my idea. Let me make that clear. I proposed this, that I talked to 3 of their people specifically involved with the Crucible. I tell their real story, and we transition that, and then the story I tell with them after interviewing them, we get their real life story out there, and then we kind of transition into how whatever happened in their real life served as motivation for why they would start the Crucible. We became part of the story. I helped tell part of the story, and it was my idea to do it. And I think that's one of the things Chris liked and wanted to bring me on and, get a peek behind the curtain and help them with their socials and help, the storyteller at top. I mean, no, you know what? I'm not about to compare Mike Quackenbush to a sex trafficker. That's a little extreme. But in Chikara, everything stopped and ended with Mike. These were his stories. These were his ideas. This was his vision. Everybody else was just simply helping to put it together, which we were happy to do because just the level of creativity coming out of this and what was we'd seen happen was remarkable, and we were happy to be a part of it. Then come the allegations that he was mentally abusive, especially toward several trainees. But one in particular, the one that got everybody's attention was Steve the Turtle, who is a legit autistic man. And all these things came out. And it wasn't just him, it was Icarus. And Ophidian was started to get some fingers pointed at him and very suddenly decided he was retiring from wrestling altogether. Imagine that.
So to ask a question, and we'll go back to this, the hashtag speaking out movement and the Me Too movement started in 2020. Am I correct?
Oh, that is very correct.
And it hit not just Chikara, it hit Ring of Honor, it hit other territories, it hit certain people, it had a lot of people. And
It hit friggin' everywhere.
right, and it wasn't just allegations. It wasn't the fact that it was just allegations. Whether it be proof or no proof, it damaged a lot of wrestlers, a lot of companies, a lot of superstars, a lot of musicians, and everything in between. A snowball effect hit. And it really affected Chikara to a point where I had to close his doors. But please continue. I'll let you continue this.
Well, and there are, I'm not going to, well, no, I'm not going to get into a whole, again, I wasn't there. I don't know what was said. I don't know who said what. I don't know if they said anything. I do know that these allegations came out. There wasn't any real, aside from eyewitness accounts. Actually, let me strike that. Aside from quote eyewitness accounts end quote, there was no real, not a whole lot of evidence came out with it. It was just people saying, yeah, this happened to me. And I'm not saying it did or didn't happen to him because I'm going to keep stressing this. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I didn't hear it. I have no idea. But again, I'm going to go back to a point you brought up. In fact, two specific words: without proof. There was no real evidence shown with this other than those accounting in those stories.
Alleged.
Now, we're taught to believe the accusers, we're taught to believe victims, and I understand. But I'm not saying this happened here because, again, I don't know. But there are cases where stories have come out that are very true and very legitimate, and there are cases where people are going to make something up because they're holding a grudge. Which
Hence, I
one
mean,
was
hence me
this?
saying, pretty
I have no.
hence me saying the word alleged. I always
Yes.
preface everything by saying alleged.
Yes. Now, whether these accusations were true or whether they were concocted by someone with a grudge, I have no idea. That's why, to your point, we have to say alleged. I wasn't there. What I can tell you is that day, again, my 46th birthday, that day, we were seeing this happen, and there was a group of us in Slack online. It was Chris, myself, um, I believe Abby Jane was part of it. I don't even know if she's in wrestling anymore. I hope she is because she was actually really good. She had all kinds of potential. Um, but there was a group of us like, okay, what do we want to do? We want to put a statement together? Do we want to, so I was kind of working on the PR aspect of it. Like, okay, how do we want to address this? And Chris is like, well, let me get a hold of Mike and see what he wants to do. Mike wasn't answering anybody.
Quackenbush.
Yes, Quackenbush. Mike Quackenbush was not answering anyone. He wasn't answering Chris. He wasn't in our thing. Nobody had heard from him. We had no idea. We're like, okay, so we can't really put anything together, put anything out because it's his company. We can't speak for the man. So we're kind of forced to hold off while just, again, allegation after allegation after allegation is coming in. And our hands are tied. Ain't nothing we can do because the man, who we're working for is literally gone radio silent for a moment. The next time any of us heard from Mike Quackenbush was when he put the statement out online addressing, I understand it was a very brief statement. I understand these allegations have come to light. We're going to work on this. And the statement pretty much ended with, I have shut down all operations at Chikara and the wrestling factory. 18 years and it was over that fast.
So a question
With
for you
none
before you
of us
continue.
knowing it was with none of us knowing it was coming until he dropped the hammer.
So a question for you before you continue. In the court of in the court of public opinion, with such a quick shutdown like that, does that assume guilt or does that assume I'm protecting myself from any further allegations, in your opinion, before you continue?
Dude, this is tough. It's tough because I have some insight as to why the decision was made and how it was made. Um, it's not okay. I'm just going to be forthright with it here. I've talked about Chris Levin. I've talked about the fact that I'm still in contact with him. I'm not just still in contact with Chris. Chris is writing a memoir, The Best at Being the Worst. I am its editor. I've read his book a couple times. He tells exactly how and why Chikara went under that day. I'm not going to do it here because it's not my story to tell. I would effectively be spoiling his book, and I want his book to do well, and I'm not going to do that. Based on what I understand, the answer to your question, is this admitting guilt or protecting yourself? The actual answer I can say is neither. But in the interactions I've had with Mike, I don't think he would have been protecting himself from further allegations. Because, mind you, the day after, not even the day after, a week or two after he had shut it down, he put out a video statement addressing every single allegation that came at him. Some he was like, no, that's not accurate. Some he admitted to. And the ones I remember him admitting to were more along the lines of the mentally abusive, but it was, I think his explanation was, I was careless in my words. We were in a quote friendly environment, end quote, but that's still no excuse for some of the things I did and said. So he owned it.
Now, I'm going to
The
interrupt
ones
you.
that were
I'm going to
correct,
interrupt.
hang on, before
Okay.
you do, the ones that were accurate, he owned them. The ones that weren't, he was like, no, that didn't happen. But the fact that he was that forthright, and I think this video statement was it was like 30 minutes to an hour. Like he didn't just do like a quick 5 minute, you know, I'm sorry, please don't cancel me and go away. He took his time and answered all of these, and owned up to the ones he owned up to. Based solely on that, I don't think it was a matter of, protecting himself from further allegations. I think it was a matter of, oh God, what have I done? I really need to take a look at, I need to take time to take a look at everything. Sorry, what were you going to say a moment ago?
It's okay. Before we get too deep into the woods, as we do, let's go ahead and rewind a little bit. For those of the uninitiated, could you give a brief definition of the hashtag Speaking Out movement and the Me Too movement? Because of course this was very brief but extremely impactful. Now in 2025, not too many people know what it's all about. So as we speak on this and the allegations, I want you just to give them a very brief definition of what it is and what this meant.
Sure. Can you still hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. Um, Give me just a split second. I don't think your listeners want to hear me blow my nose. So hold on.
It's okay. I'll put you on mute for a second. And of course, as he does that, of course, we'll let everyone know. As of course, please make sure you subscribe, follow, comment, and share walkerac76.podbean.com. That's walkerac76.podbean.com. Also, be sure you bookmark walkeracexperience.com/mobile. walkeracexperience.com/mobile. And of course, get some of our merchandise at cafepress.com/shop/WACE.
All right, I can breathe again. It's almost like you had that prepared, by the way. That is some pro level stuff. That is impressive.
Thank you.
My hat's off. Um, Very quickly, it has to start with the Me Too movement, which was, I don't remember the exact allegation who it was. Well, I mean, this ain't an allegation. I mean, let's start there. I'm not going to say Me Too was, oh, this was alleged allegation. No, because the person being accused at that time was Harvey Weinstein, who, as we all know, has been found guilty in a court of law. He is no longer accused. He is full stop. He's guilty. But after this person came forward with their story about Harvey Weinstein, there were several other people that came forward with their stories about several other people in entertainment and Hollywood, anything from, mental and physical abuse to sexual abuse. There was all kinds of stuff that came out because one person had that courage to come forward. Speaking out, when in a general sense, it was wrestling's versions of Me Too. Um, I believe the first person that was accused of, I don't want to say sexual assault or abuse, but
Inappropriate
um,
behavior.
sure, we'll go with that, even though that covers a wide spectrum of things here, but inappropriate actions. Um, if you remember David Starr, he was first.
Yes. Yeah.
And then again, it over the next several weeks, it snowballed to include very many others, including Marty Skrull is one we've hardly seen since. Um, I can't remember that kid with the twirly mustache. He was in WWE for a bit, the little English kid, skinny one, the little boxer. I legitimately, I see you sitting there laughing, but I cannot think of his name.
Jack Gallagher.
Thank you. He was another one. You seen him since?
Absolutely not. He went into MMA for a bit, boxing, and he fell off the face of the earth. Also, another deathmatch wrestler. Now he's a UPS driver. I forgot his name. He was in AEW for a very brief period of time. Havoc.
Oh, Jimmy Havoc.
Jimmy Havoc.
His name I do remember because he was very, yes. I just couldn't think of Jack Gallagher. I could see his face and everything else about him, but I couldn't think of his name to save my life. Jack Gallagher, Jimmy Havoc,
Uh,
David Starr,
it went
Marty
even to
Scurll.
yeah, it went to even AEW's, wrestler went to Jay Lethal. It went to Darby Allin. It went to so many other wrestlers that are known today. So the speaking out movement definitely affected wrestling as a whole, but it really affected Chikara more than anything.
Oh, yeah, it came to OVW too. Guess who had to put together the PR strategy for that one because I was working there at the time.
I
Yeah.
wonder.
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine. I couldn't tell you who. His name escapes me, despite the fact that he's talking to you right this second.
I know, go figure.
But yeah, I mean, imagine. Yeah, the mind boggles. But no, it hit OVW too, and I had to deal with that crap. Um, yeah, there are, by the way, off this will be an off-air conversation, but there are two very beloved names in pro wrestling that I know I said I wouldn't do this again, but they've earned it. Can fuck right off. All the way. Not pass and go, not collecting $200. The fact that I said I had to handle this with LBW should give you a hint, and I'm just going to stop there.
We
But be
shall
that
move.
as it may, going back to our point, speaking out reached far and wide. Matt Riddle was another one. Um, I can't think of his accuser, but she was in Evolve with him. Candy Cartwright, if I have her name right, I think.
You're right with the first name, and of course, people right now are screaming at their phones right now, yelling at us, who the name is.
I'm
Um,
sure they are. I'm turning 51 in a few weeks. I have the memory of an old man. All right, give me some slack here. Sorry, Candy was right. What is the last name? I know I got that wrong.
well, we're gonna have to look this up. We're gonna go into our fancy Google machine and do that. But
Oh, I thought you were telling me that I got the last name wrong because you knew what her actual name was at the moment.
now
But anyway,
without now
a
without
whole
getting
bunch of people,
yes,
huh?
but a main one here before we jump back into what we're talking about and the actual reason why we're doing this episode. I'll give you one more, and I think it's the most. I think it's a major person you forgot. Not necessarily forgot, but he's been out of our sight of mind for eyesight for a very long
Can
time.
I pause you there a second?
Yes.
There were so freaking many people that had fingers pointed at them. I'm not even going to claim old man memory. There's just too damn many to remember. Sorry, go on. But I'm sure once you tell me who this is, I'm going to kick myself. But
No, and this is our last one because obviously our goal is not to really throw these people under the bus or anything of the sort. These are just allegations, alleged things that were going on.
no,
Some,
we are spending a sidebar moment talking about speaking out because it is giving greater context to the story we're telling about Chikara.
yes, and the final name that most people have forgotten about, Joey Ryan.
Oh, okay. Okay. See, I have an excuse for this one. I forgot about it because it was deliberate. I didn't ever want to remember or hear that name again. But yeah, I think, and really out of everybody we've named, even people you don't see again, I think he was one of the worst. I don't say that as in, oh, he was awful. What he did was, just, but the things he was accused of compared to everybody else was pretty bad.
Something controversial.
There's a reason we haven't heard from some of these folks since then.
Something controversial, and I'll say this, and then we'll move on. And this will be a subject for another day. Looking at the evidence, I believe Joy Ryan was just a casualty of the speaking out movement. He was a casualty because of his character, because of the way he presented the character and the gimmick. It was so sexual. It was so out there. It wasn't something of the norm that when the Speaking Out movement came out, he was one of the targets. Now, this is just only my opinion. I could be wrong. Not the first time, not the last time. But I definitely think he he kind of got part of a raw deal. Was Joey Ryan a good guy? I don't know. Did he do the things that he was accused of? I don't know. But I just believe with his gimmick, that's the main thing. That's the major word I'm using. His gimmick got him into the hot water where he is mainly. That's just my opinion.
Understood. And I think it was a hell of a lot more than his gimmick. But we ain't here to debate that.
But Google it, kids. But back to the topic at hand. My question to you is, Mike, as we go along here with the show, if the question is, if the Me Too movement and the Speaking Out movement did not occur, do you think Chikara would still be going on strong in
Yes,
2020? Okay.
you don't even have to finish a question.
Why so?
Again, based on what I know that I can't speak about, yes, they would have. Now, well, let me back up a bit. Would they still be going strong? It's hard to say. Knowing what I know that would not have happened if it weren't for all this, you could make the case that they would. However, we can talk about speaking out. We can talk about accusations. We can talk about allegations. We can talk about the horrible stuff people do all day long. But there's one other very huge thing that happened in 2020 that affected a lot of wrestling promotions.
That would be.
That would be the pandemic. When no one could go to a wrestling show, when no one was buying a ticket to see a show, the way that a lot of these smaller independent companies make their money, they don't have massive TV rights deals like WWE and AEW to lean on. They don't have networks that own them and they're willing to run at a loss like TNA or anything else. Your smaller independent companies are relying on ticket sales from event to event to get them by in the most cases. Those things like that, sponsors, all of that. Well, what happens when no one can buy a ticket because they can't come to a show because the world's shut down?
That's a good
Mind
point.
you, I talked about what I have on this drive is the very last Chikara show, that final Cybernetico episode. You know who was in the audience for that?
You.
No one, because they couldn't be. It was shot during the pandemic. The world was on lockdown. There was no audience, and there wasn't going to be for a long time. You take that into consideration, I was a little, what's the word I'm looking for? The opposite of hesitant. I rushed to say yes, Chikara would still be around, but who knows? Because there's a lot of other companies that fell to the pandemic and they didn't have a bloody thing to do with speaking out.
But
Meanwhile, there were some companies that did come under fire that are still around.
exactly. But to play devil's advocate, knowing the storytelling of Chikara, how they can shut down for a year and a half and come back and do a whole new storyline or continue a storyline, would you be remiss to say that they could take the pandemic and spin it into a positive, whether it be online storytelling or just saying we're taking X amount of time off, coming back with a new batch,
Well,
a wrestlers, storylines, things of that nature.
you know, I'm actually glad you asked that because there's a point I've been wanting to get out there for a while. There are a butt ton of people online, most people online, as a matter of fact, that when they talk about the pro wrestling business, they forget about the word business. Creatively, could Chikara have overcome the pandemic and done something like that? I have no doubt. No doubt in my mind they could have overcome it. But from a business standpoint, you had nobody paying for tickets. You're shelling out money to produce these shows when you have no money coming in to cover it. Because of these allegations, we don't know if they ever would have gotten back on their feet and gotten that money back. I think if we take other business factors out of the equation, I think from a creative standpoint, Chikara could have overcome the fateful events of June 24th, 2020, my 46th birthday, and ultimately come back in such a fashion that they would still be around in some form or another, if not stronger. But the part that people always ignore is the business standpoint, and that, who knows? Because again, the pandemic, I can't even. We could do an entire episode probably on the number of companies the pandemic murdered because they just simply couldn't keep going. They couldn't afford it anymore. Whether or not Chikara would have been one of those, I
Now
don't know.
here's another what if question for you. With the love and the passion this particular person has for pro wrestling, and knowing once again how much he loves the classics, hypothetically speaking, would you think Tony Khan would have picked up on Chikara? Because he had Eddie Kingston, had Orange Cassidy, and he had a couple other wrestlers from there also. So do you think when with Tony purchased ROH after the pandemic, do you think he would have kept Chikara alive, knowing his deep knowledge and love for the business?
I don't know that he would have done it of his own volition. But I do think there's an awful lot of people there, like Claudio, like Eddie Kingston, like Orange Cassidy, like a person working there as a producer who we never see on screen. And for the love of God, I wish we would. Chris Hero, who was also there. I think quite a few people would have begged and pleaded for him to pick that company up, and they may have convinced him to do it. So yeah, it's very possible. I don't know if he would have done it of his own volition, but I do think ultimately he would have been convinced to purchase that company as well, or at least put some money into it to help keep it going, if not buy it outright.
And my final question to you before we go into a small editorial portion, English people, of the show is once again, we always ask the question in our series here, polarizing the what ifs. And in thinking if Chikara would have been around in 2025 and how the product was based on heavy entertainment mixed in with very, very good wrestling, do you think most of the wrestlers, most of the characters would have had to evolve to keep up with this type of wrestling now in this society? Meaning wrestlers like the Ant Colony or Dragon or something like that would have to go by the wayside for actual, much more just like legitimate wrestling? Or do you think it would have kept that same comedic type of entertainment style?
Don't take this wrong, but I'm almost insulted by that question. The reason I'm almost insulted by that question is that, yes, Chikara had silly characters. They had some wild out stories. They had all kinds of crazy stuff going on, but never for one moment did they sacrifice the action that happened in that ring. People like the Colony and Dragon were already excellent wrestlers. The crew that they had before it folded, Jet Jahorgi, Boomer Hatfield, Molly McCoy, Matt Makowski, now Matt Mako. Every one of them were excellent workers in between those ropes. So there's no doubt in my mind that the in-ring part would have evolved because, quite frankly, a lot of the in-ring stuff you see, particularly in AEW, yeah, Chikara was doing that junk about 10 years before, you know, there was some amazing stuff going on physically in Chikara before the world knew what a Will Ospreay was. I mean, one of the guys that participated in the King of Trios we talked about very early in his career, who probably would have also had talked to Tony about, hey, let's see if we can do Ricochet. There's no doubt in my mind that quality in ring would have also continued, as well as the storytelling, because that's what the Wrestle Factory did. That's what they were about,
Very good. And
is
finally,
doing both. And the final, sorry, go on.
no, that's okay. And of course, the final line for Chikara, what ifs? So me asking you, the man that's been there, the man that's done that with Chikara, how do you feel that Chikara wrestling promotion will be remembered?
I think it'll be overall remembered fondly, but with its legacy unfairly tarnished.
Interesting. So with that, if people want to find you and reach out to you with any questions or comments, where can they find you?
Uh, you can find me. Well, I'm not on Facebook much anymore. I'm still there, but not as active. Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, all the same. It's Melcore Media is where you can find me there.
And of course, be sure you follow him at Grindhouse Pro Wrestling as well. A tremendous promotion, great upcoming superstars. Definitely keep an eye out for them as well.
Well, thank you for that. And folks, if you had been following me on there, you would learn that, God help me, my first and last match is about 50 some odd days away. 52, I think, if I'm got my math right.
And if something happens to you, we'll be taking open applications for a new co-host. It's perfectly fine, folks. And you can always,
Yeah, I don't know how well I can do this show in traction. So yeah, you may as well.
and of course, like I mentioned before, be sure you subscribe, follow walkerac76.podbean.com. That's walkerac76.podbean.com. Make sure I get this one right here. walkeraccexperience.com/mobile. This has been Polarizing, the wrestling podcast. He has been Michael Melkor. I have been Adrian Walker. We will see you again in about a week and a half, 2 weeks, with a brand new episode. Now, totally keep you going. Till next time, folks.